toxic masculinity.
AOC is furious that reporters are referring to the border search as a surge.
Yeah, you're not allowed to say
Surge is racist?
I guess. She's saying that it's like a military language, which isn't true. A surge is not necessarily a military language. Like, let me look up dictionary.com.
And now that they've changed it?
Yeah, they may have changed it specifically to conform to AOC's. Let's look at what the dictionary definition of surge is. They say a strong wave-like forward movement, a rush or sweep. I think that's true. The example they give is an angry mob, right? So not military. Not positive either, but not military. Let's see here. A strong swelling wave-like volume or body of something. A billowing surge of smoke, for instance. Let's see here. She's adjusting her camera, guys, but she'll be back. A ship to rise and fall, tossed about or moving along the waves. This is all what I think of when I think of the word surge. I think of like a large volume of stuff moving forward at the same time. I don't necessarily think of a military surge, but AOC apparently does. Now, so, and in fact, none of these, in fact, I'm not finding any military usage here at all in these dictionary definitions. Yeah, so let's go ahead and go back to the AOC thing. Let's see here. Let's go ahead and watch what she has to say about this. It's pretty mental. And let me explain why she's saying what she's saying here. But
let me explain why she's saying what she's saying.
But let's watch it first.
They want to say, what about the surge? Well, first of all, just gut check, stop. Anyone who's using the term surge around you consciously is trying to invoke a militaristic frame. And that's a problem because this is not a surge. These are children and they are not insurgents and we are not being invaded, which, by the way, is a white supremacist idea, philosophy. The idea that if an other is coming in the population, that this is like an invasion of who we are. They want to.
okay, first of all, gut check, stop. I was gonna start singing the Vanilla Ice song, but I can't remember the words. I don't remember the second part. I know listen comes in. It's stop something and then listen. I don't remember what the second word is. It would have been funny, I promise. Okay, so AOC is saying that we are intentionally using militaristic language to talk about the border thing. The left is, we talked about this yesterday. The left, or maybe the day before, the left uses language very carefully to try to manipulate people, right? So they'll use a specific word or term or phrase to try to gain sympathy. Mm-hmm. And then they'll also, take words and phrases that conservatives are using, and they'll assign meaning to them that they don't have. So they'll distort them in a way. Like, for instance, Donald Trump, they did this with Trump all the time, right? Donald Trump used the term Chinese virus, Wuhan virus, right? He was basically indicating that this virus came from China. This is what everybody did with every virus pretty much up until that point, right? People are always calling, like, Lyme disease comes from an area called Lyme County, I believe, in Pennsylvania or something like that. I can't remember. Somewhere. There's something called the Spanish flu, right? We call it the Spanish flu. None of these things, none of the viruses that came before were referred to as such, geographically, because people wanted to say, oh, the people from that region are horrible. Right? It's just a way to distinguish the virus. It's a virus that came out of this particular region. And for the left to then, they were calling it the Chinese virus. They're calling it Wuhan virus. Trump started saying it. They said it was racist. It wasn't, of course. But this is what they do to try to manipulate people, to try to make you believe something that isn't true. This whole concept of a surge being military language And the weird thing is that she's saying this is done intentionally. I mean, it would actually be somewhat believable if she would say this is a mindset that conservatives have, and they unconsciously use militaristic language because that's how they're thinking of this, right? I could actually see that as somewhat believable. I mean, I wouldn't believe it because I know it isn't true, but it's something that's not as easily disproved. You can't disprove that. You can't say, it's sort of like saying, oh, people have unconscious bias, so they may not know they're racist, but they are, right? That's something that's very difficult. I mean, you can't disprove that. That's a theory that you can't prove or disprove. It's just something that you believe or you don't believe. But she's not saying that. What she's saying is that we are doing this very intentionally, right? We're intentionally calling it a surge because we want people to think of it as a military insurgency. That's not true. That's not true. We're not saying it's an insurgency. Nobody's ever said, it's funny because they'll use that language when it comes to the people that were protesting at the Capitol, right? January 6th. They'll say these were insurgents, right? That this was some kind of a what were they calling it at the Capitol? They were calling it a insurrection, right? They were calling them insurrectionists, and they were calling it an insurrection, right? So this is something. I mean,
they called the Biden president-elect.
What?
Insurrection.
What? They called it the Biden president correct.
No.
Those words didn't make any sense.
Do you remember that Biden president-elect?
Oh.
Insurrection. I think everything is correct. What they're saying.
No, they didn't say President-elect Biden. He said something else about like election, or this is Chuck Schumer, I think.
Yeah.
He said something. He, instead of saying elect, he said erect.
Yeah. And
or instead of election, he said erection.
Insurrection.
So we started to call Joe Biden President-elect Biden because of that. But that's pretty funny. But yeah, okay, that was a confusing tangent. Now I've lost my place. Thank you. Yeah, no, they'll call these people insurrectionists. They'll say it was an insurrection. That's obviously not true. Most of these people were
terrorists.
They call them terrorists, which is crazy. Most of these people were like casually walking through the building. The doors were opened for them. They didn't know that they were doing something wrong. A lot of these guys, they just thought they were making their voices heard. They were, expressing. They were exercising their. Exercising. I'm looking for the word exercise. They were exercising their First Amendment right. That's what these people thought they were doing. They're going and marching peaceably. Now, there were some people that were breaking some stuff. Maybe some of them were conservatives. Maybe some of them were not conservatives. Okay, but nobody did anything violent. Nobody tried to burn down the Capitol or anything like that, no. Right? Mm-mm. So, and it wasn't clear that they were actually going in to stop the proceedings. It was more that they, everybody that I heard talking about it, at least the conservatives I heard talking about it, they were saying, we want our voices heard. We believe this election, that the election wasn't 100%, and we want it investigated. That's what they were saying. That's all they were saying. And that is a completely valid thing to say. It's a completely valid thing to want to be heard by these people. And so for them to call them insurrectionists, that's completely disingenuous. It's a kind of propaganda. It's a way to demonize people on the right, to demonize Trump supporters, to get all their sort of legislation enacted that will round up Trump supporters and criminalize what they're doing. So the left does manipulate language in a way that is completely deceptive. But what AOC is doing here is she's saying that that's what we do, right? And again, this is a perfect example of how the left uses what we would call psychological projection, right? Except this is totally conscious. Psychological projection is when you tend to be a certain way, and so you think maybe other people are that way too because you're that way, right? And maybe you don't even recognize the stuff you're doing, but you recognize it in other people, but you don't recognize, in fact, they're not doing that, you're doing it, right? You're the bad guy, they're not. This is psychological projection. A lot of that is supposed to be unconscious, I think, in psychology. I could be wrong. If you're a psychiatrist, you can let me know in the comments. But in this case, they're knowingly doing this. I think that, maybe not always. Maybe this is something AOC doesn't even realize. Maybe this is pure psychological projection, where she doesn't realize the left does this, and she's claiming that the right does it. But no, this is something the left does, we don't do, but they're pointing at us and saying we're doing it. This is something that the left does about just about everything. Everything they do that's criminal, everything they do that's unethical. They will say, we would never do such a thing. But you know who does it? The right. And so they're pretending that we're using the word surge because it's some kind of a manipulative language tool.
Is she offering to call it something else? Is she offering another word to it to describe the situation?
I think that she wants it to be called prancing, immigrant prancing, into they're prancing into daintily prancing.
Dancing?
No, I'm just making that up.
If you criticize something, suggest
another term.
Yes.
Yeah. No, you make a very good point, actually. That's perfect. That's actually a perfect point.
Everyone can criticize anything.
Yeah. No, it's a great point. I'm not sure what term that she would use, but she's saying that these are children. These are children.
What's this called? Illegal immigration?
Yeah, we could call it illegal immigration. But here's the thing. It is a surge. And a surge isn't something that's militaristic. And some of them are children, but not all of them are children, AOC. Let's stop pretending they're all children and happy families. Some of them are drug dealers. Some of them are criminals. They're not all innocent little children. Okay, let's not BS the American people. She speaks in a way that is utterly deceptive, and then she points to conservatives, and she pretends that we're saying things that are deceptive, which isn't true. I mean, it's pretty tough to watch that kind of stuff because it's so outrageous. So anyway, AOC, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Joe Biden, all the Democrats are criminals, and if you vote for them, you are voting for a criminal.
And that's how our video get demonetized. Okay.
Let's move on to the next story.
Okay. AOC blames the border crisis on white supremacy and the climate.
Yeah, okay. So this is a story that I didn't actually read yet, so this will be interesting to watch or to read because I just put it on here because I noticed this and I thought, okay, this is a good add-on. So let's have a look at this. AOC fires border crisis salvos, blames white supremacy and climate change. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is raising eyebrows on social media for her politicization of the surge of illegal immigrants at the border, which she admits was a crisis, unlike the Biden administration blaming it on imperialism, climate, and white supremacy. Oh, well, you know what? It is funny that she mentions the white supremacy thing in that other video that we watched. Mm-hmm. She's like, this is a philosophy of white supremacy to call the immigration thing a surge. Yeah. I don't know what she's calling it, but this is another thing that the left likes to do. They like to associate things with white supremacists. This is in my Twitter video where I talk about the reasons why Twitter was banning accounts who were writing hashtag learn to code, right? So there was this whole situation where leftists were saying that if you're like a coal miner and we're going to get rid of coal jobs because of,
climate,
clean energy BS, then you can just learn to code. You can learn to be a coder. You got this guy, he's like 65. He's been digging in mines for his whole life. They're like, just learn to code. Learn to code. And it was ridiculous. And everybody was like, okay, you are a heartless bunch of a-holes in the media saying this. Biden said it. Hillary Clinton said it. Obama said it. And then all these reporters were saying it in the media. And people online were thinking, this is a heartless, horrible way of thinking about this, way of speaking about this is terrible. So then there was a crisis in journalism where all these newspapers were getting, going bankrupt and all these reporters were losing their jobs. Mm-hmm. And the reporters were talking about how it was this terrible crisis and it was awful. And then everybody on Twitter started writing to these reporters, hashtag learn to code, right? They were saying, oh, why don't you just learn to code, reporters? Why don't you just learn to code? Which is hilarious and awesome. And I love that happened in the world because it's just like, yeah, maybe you shouldn't be throwing stones, But anyway, so because of this, some reporters complained that conservatives were writing them learn to code. And then Twitter started banning their Twitter accounts because these reporters were complaining about it. And this was brought up in this Joe Rogan interview. And Jack Dorsey's little minion, Vijaya, who does all the censorship at YouTube, or at Twitter, She said, well, the reason why we were canceling those accounts is because they weren't just writing learn to code. They were also writing like white supremacist stuff as well. And it didn't make any sense because maybe one of the accounts or two of the accounts that were maybe writing learn to code to these journalists were also writing some kind of white supremacist hashtag as well. My guess is it was probably like one Twitter user or something like that. And then like 100 or 200 or 1,000 other people were writing learn to code as well. And all of their accounts were suspended as well because this one person had written some like white supremacist hashtag alongside the learn to code thing. And they were saying, oh, well, if this person wrote a white supremacist hashtag, then it means that learn to code is also associated with this white supremacist, which means it's a white supremacist thing, even though it, of course, wasn't. And I proposed, like, well, what if a white supremacist has a dog? He really likes his dog. And every time he posts a Twitter thing, he writes, I love dogs. And then he writes some kind of nasty white supremacist thing to somebody. And alongside that, he also writes hashtag learn to dog, I love dogs. Do we then ban every account that writes I love dogs?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, that's the point. That's the point. Right? That's the point. Like, you
And
can't.
they can say we banned that hashtag because Ivanka Trump used it on her dog,
Right,
and her dog
exactly.
is white.
So, I mean, this is the kind of convoluted gymnastics, like mental gymnastics that people have to go through in order to justify the kind of outrageous fascistic behavior that they're conducting. All right, so let's go ahead and read a little bit more of this. Okay, so she says that she's blaming the border crisis on imperialism, climate, and white supremacy. She made multiple visits to the southern border during the Trump administration, but the progressive firebrand now has been notably absent at the border and had been quiet until an Instagram live video Tuesday in which she was circulated on the media. I think this is the video that I just watched. I don't remember her saying anything about climate. Let's see here.
There's
It's
a
the
video,
video that
when
we
she
just
says that?
watched.
Ah, you mean that the same?
I think that's what they're talking about, but I don't remember her saying anything about climate. Do you?
No.
Oh, yeah, I don't. Okay. Well, we're talking about it, she says in the video. They just don't like how we're talking about it because it's not a border crisis. It's an imperialism crisis. So maybe this is a different video. Oh, I wish I had read this ahead of time. I would have grabbed that video for you guys. It's an imperialism crisis. It's a climate crisis. It's a trade criticism, and it's also a carceral crisis. Carceral crisis. She's talking about like people being incarcerated. She likes to use big words like
She doesn't know
carceral.
what she's talking about.
Yeah, to make her sound smart. This is a trick that dumb people use sometimes to sound smart. I'm going to use the word carceral because not a lot of people know what that means, and then people think I'm all smart.
Yeah, I think we need to write her a hashtag learn to bartend. Oh, she's a bartender. Forgot about that. I forgot
Learn to
about that.
bartend. I actually quite like that. I think that's quite good. She probably wasn't a very good bartender. Let's see here. Carceral crisis. Yeah. Right. The latter term is referencing imprisonment, but she did not have pointed words for President Joe Biden like she did for former President Donald Trump for detaining kids in cramped quarters. Ocasio-Cortez also rebuked the term surge. So maybe there's like a longer version of that video that we didn't see the whole thing.
Well, I want to see more videos like this because did you see that zoom in the beginning?
She does.
There's some
this.
TikTok genius right there.
She is. There's this kind of zoom in thing.
What about the surge?
I kind of want to just make a loop of that. Just post that on Twitter. What about the surge? Because she did that on purpose.
Of course.
You have to do that on
told it,
purpose.
A TikTok genius.
She's a TikTok genius.
If she has TikTok, sorry, I just looks like she
Right.
want to be a TikTok star.
I need to remind me to put that on because I'm gonna make this. I'm gonna actually put it on this channel. I'm gonna make a compilation of like the idiotic stuff that Democrats have been doing recently on throughout the it's gonna be a very funny video, but I'm gonna post it on this channel because this channel still has the ability to get new viewers. What are you looking at?
No, she doesn't have an account on TikTok.
Oh, does she not?
No.
Okay.
Because for me, it looked like a TikTok thing,
No, I think it. I don't know what it is. It looks like Instagram to me because you've got all these.
Yeah, that's the Instagram, but the format.
Okay. All right. Well, let's. I've had enough of AOC for today.
Okay.
Can we move on to the next story?
Facebook removes Trump interview with his daughter-in-law.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I didn't read this one either. I didn't have a lot of time this morning to read all the stories, but let's have a look at this because I don't know what this is about. Facebook removes Trump interview with daughter-in-law citing content policy. Toxic Masculinity. Weekdays, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific.